My name is Katelyn Reed. I'm 37 years old, and for the past 12 years I've walked through shadows most people never see. As a DEA special agent, I've infiltrated drug cartels, survived assassination attempts, and put my life on the line to keep poison off the streets. I've seen humanity at its darkest face down killers who wouldn't hesitate to pull the trigger, and carried secrets that could topple governments. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the moment I stood in that sterile courtroom and heard my own brother Marcus point his finger at me with pure venom in his voice, declaring to a room full of strangers, "She's nothing but a corrupt agent who's been stealing drug money for years. Everything she has, she stole from the government." The words hit me like a physical blow. The sudden hush that fell over the courtroom was deafening. I could feel every pair of eyes boring into me, stripping away years of service, sacrifice, and sleepless nights spent protecting communities I'd never even visited. My mother sat beside Marcus, her face a mask of rehearsed sorrow, nodding as if his words were gospel truth. I didn't break. I didn't cry. I didn't even flinch. Instead, I reached into my leather briefcase with steady hands and pulled out a small black case I had been carrying for 3 long months. My fingers were rock steady as I stood up, walked across that cold marble floor, and placed it gently on Judge Harrison's desk. He opened it with curiosity, and then everything changed. His face went pale, his eyes widened. When he spoke, his voice carried an authority that made the entire room go dead silent. "Bailiff, seal this courtroom immediately. No one enters or leaves." Within seconds, the heavy oak doors slammed shut with a finality that echoed through the chamber. That's when they appeared. 3 federal agents in crisp dark suits, moving with the precision of a military operation, their badges gleaming under the fluorescent lights. FBI. My brother's smug expression crumbled like wet paper. His attorney, who had been so confident just moments before, dropped his pen, and it clattered to the floor in the suffocating silence. Marcus stumbled backward, his face draining of all color. My mother's carefully composed mask finally slipped, revealing the panic beneath. Tyler, my youngest brother, sat frozen in the gallery, his eyes darting between the agents and me, confusion and fear written across his features. In that moment, I wasn't the corrupt agent they had painted me to be. I wasn't the family outcast who had supposedly brought shame to the Reed name. I was Special Agent Katelyn Reed, and I had just exposed a conspiracy that reached deeper than anyone in that room could have imagined. The badge in that case wasn't just my identification, it was the key that would unlock a web of lies, corruption, and betrayal that had been years in the making. I never imagined my life would bring me to that courtroom, facing down my own family like they were the criminals I'd spent my career chasing. But to understand how we got there, you need to know who the Reeds were before everything fell apart, before the money and power corrupted what should have been unbreakable bonds. Growing up in Cedar Falls, Oregon, our family was considered local royalty. My father, Robert Reed, had built Reed and Associates from nothing into one of the most successful consulting firms in the Pacific Northwest. The company specialized in helping businesses navigate complex regulations, particularly in industries dealing with federal oversight. Pharmaceutical companies, import-export businesses, manufacturing firms, they all came to my father when they needed someone who understood how to work within the system. Our house sat on 10 acres overlooking Mirror Lake, a sprawling property that my father had purchased when the business first started turning serious profit. It wasn't the biggest house in town, but it was elegant, understated, the kind of place that whispered success rather than shouting it. My father used to say that real wealth was quiet, and he lived by that principle. Marcus, my older brother by 4 years, was groomed from birth to inherit everything. He had my father's sharp mind for business, and my mother's ability to charm anyone within 5 minutes of meeting them. Patricia Reed, our mother, had been a local beauty queen before she married my father, and she never let anyone forget it. She ran the social circles of Cedar Falls like a general commanding an army, organizing charity events, hosting political fundraisers, and making sure the Reed name was associated with everything respectable and powerful in our community. Tyler was the baby of the family, 6 years younger than me, and he lived in the shadow of Marcus's golden reputation and my rebellious independence. Where Marcus excelled at playing the perfect son, and I caused headaches by refusing to fit into the mold they'd prepared for me, Tyler simply tried to stay invisible. He was gentle, bookish, more interested in his computer programming classes than in the family business or social expectations. I was the middle child, the one who never quite fit the plan. While Marcus learned about profit margins and client relations, I was reading about criminal justice and federal law enforcement. While my mother tried to teach me how to host dinner parties and plan charity galas, I was at the shooting range or studying for my criminal justice degree. I remember the exact moment I told them I wanted to join the DEA. I was 22, fresh out of college, and completely naive about how my family would react. The dinner table went silent. My father set down his fork and stared at me like I'd announced I was joining a cult. My mother actually gasped, one hand flying to her chest in that dramatic way she'd perfected over the years. Marcus just shook his head, a condescending smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Katelyn, honey," my mother said in that voice she used when she was trying to be patient with what she considered my childish phases. "Law enforcement isn't really appropriate for someone of your background. What will people think?" "I don't care what people think," I replied, and I meant it. "I care about making a difference." My father leaned back in his chair, studying me with those calculating eyes that had made him so successful in business. "The Reed name carries weight in this community, Katelyn. We have responsibilities. Expectations, your expectations," I shot back. "Not mine." The argument that followed was epic, even by Reed family standards. Voices were raised, ultimatums were issued, and tears were shed, though not by me. In the end, I left anyway. At 23, with nothing but my determination and an acceptance letter to the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, I walked away from everything my family represented. The training at Quantico was brutal, designed to break down everything you thought you knew about yourself and rebuild you into something harder, sharper, more focused. For 18 weeks, I pushed my body and mind to limits I didn't know existed. I learned to think like a criminal, so I could catch them. I studied chemistry so I could understand how drugs were manufactured and distributed. I practiced surveillance techniques until I could disappear into any crowd. Most importantly, I learned that justice wasn't always clean or convenient. Sometimes doing the right thing meant making enemies. Sometimes it meant standing alone against people who would destroy you to protect their own interests. I thought I was learning these lessons to use against drug dealers and cartel members. I never imagined I'd need them against my own family. My first assignment was in Phoenix, working narcotics in one of the most dangerous corridors for drug trafficking in the country. The desert was unforgiving, the criminals were ruthless, and the work was thankless. Most days, I felt like I was trying to stop a flood with a coffee cup. But occasionally, very occasionally, we'd make a bust that mattered. We'd take down a distribution network or arrest a kingpin, and for a brief moment, I'd remember why I'd chosen this path. I spent 3 years in Arizona, learning the trade, making connections, and slowly building a reputation as someone who could be trusted with sensitive operations. My supervisors noticed that I had a talent for undercover work. I could slip into different personas like changing clothes, becoming whoever the situation required. A party girl looking to score, a businesswoman with questionable ethics, a desperate addict willing to do anything for a fix. I could be all of them convincingly. That skill set led to my transfer to Portland, where I spent the next 5 years working some of the most complex cases of my career. The Pacific Northwest drug trade was different from what I'd seen in Arizona. More sophisticated, more connected to legitimate business interests, and infinitely more dangerous, because of how well it hid in plain sight. I was good at my job, really good. My arrest record spoke for itself, and my superiors trusted me with increasingly sensitive operations. I'd gone undercover in situations that would have terrified most agents, and I'd come out the other side with evidence that put dangerous people behind bars for decades. But success in federal law enforcement comes with a price. The hours are brutal, the stress is constant, and the paranoia becomes a way of life. You learn not to trust anyone completely, because in my world, the wrong decision about trust could get you killed. You learn to compartmentalize, to separate your work life from your personal life so completely that sometimes you forget which version of yourself is real. I rarely made it home to Cedar Falls during those years. When I did visit, the conversations were strained and surface level. My family would ask vague questions about my work, and I'd give vague answers about paperwork and court appearances. They didn't want to know the real details, and I couldn't share them anyway. We existed in parallel universes, connected by blood but separated by choices that seemed to matter more with each passing year. Marcus had taken over more responsibilities at Reed and Associates, and the company was thriving under his leadership. He'd expanded their client base, opened offices in Seattle and San Francisco, and was being talked about as one of the rising stars in the regional business community. My mother beamed with pride whenever his name came up in conversation, and my father spoke about retirement, confident that his legacy was in capable hands. Tyler had graduated with a computer science degree and was working for a tech startup in Portland. He was the only one who seemed genuinely interested in my work, asking careful questions about cybercrime and digital evidence. We'd grab coffee when I was in town, and those conversations were the only times I felt like I was still connected to my family in any meaningful way. The distance between us grew wider when my father was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. It was aggressive, and the doctors were clear about the timeline. He had months, not years. I took leave from the DEA to spend time with him, moving back into my childhood bedroom in the house by Mirror Lake, trying to make up for all the years I'd been absent. Those final months were complicated. My father and I talked more honestly than we ever had before, and I began to understand his disapproval of my career choice had been rooted in fear rather than shame. He'd built something he was proud of, and he'd wanted his children to be part of that legacy. He'd never understood why I'd chosen to walk away from security and respect to chase criminals through the shadows.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
I worry about you, Katelyn, he told me one evening as we sat on the deck overlooking the lake. This work you do, it changes people. I can see it in your eyes. You're harder than you used to be. The work matters, Dad, I replied. I'm making a difference. But at what cost? He asked quietly. What happens when the job is over? What do you have left? I didn't have a good answer for him then. I thought I was saving that conversation for later, for some hypothetical future when I'd figured out how to balance the demands of my career with the relationships I'd sacrificed along the way. I never got the chance to finish that conversation. My father died on a Tuesday morning in late spring, with all of us gathered around his hospital bed. The funeral was everything my mother could have wanted: elegant, well-attended, a fitting tribute to a man who'd earned respect throughout the community. Politicians gave speeches, business leaders shared memories, and the local paper ran a front-page obituary that read like a love letter to the American dream. The reading of the will took place 2 weeks later in the conference room at Reed & Associates. The attorney, a family friend who'd known us all since childhood, went through the formalities with professional compassion. Marcus inherited the business, as everyone expected. Tyler received a trust fund that would allow him to pursue his own interests without financial pressure. My mother was left comfortable for life, with the house and enough assets to maintain her lifestyle. And I received something that surprised everyone, including myself. My father had left me a controlling stake in a piece of property I'd never heard of before. 20 acres of undeveloped land about an hour outside of Cedar Falls, purchased quietly several years earlier through a shell company. According to the will, it was meant to be my nest egg, my security for the future he'd worried I wasn't building for myself. The property wasn't worth millions, but it was valuable enough to matter. More importantly, it was entirely mine, with no strings attached and no family oversight required. For the first time since leaving home, I owned something that connected me to my father's legacy, without requiring me to compromise my own choices. At the time, I thought it was his way of making peace with the path I'd chosen. A gesture of support, an understanding that had come too late for us to discuss, but wasn't too late to matter. I was touched by the thought that he'd been planning for my future even when he couldn't understand. I should have known it was too good to last. I should have recognized the signs of trouble brewing beneath the surface of my family's polite grief. Marcus's tight smile when the property was mentioned. My mother's pointed questions about why my father had never told her about the purchase. The way conversations stopped when I entered a room during the weeks following the funeral. But I was grieving too, and I was eager to return to Portland and throw myself back into work that made sense to me. I thought we'd have time to adjust to the new family dynamics, to figure out how to move forward without the man who'd held us together for so long. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about almost everything. The first legal notice arrived exactly 6 weeks after the funeral. A thick envelope with my name, typed across expensive stationery, delivered by certified mail to my apartment in Portland. Inside was a complaint filed by Marcus Reed and Patricia Reed against Katelyn Reed, challenging the validity of my father's will, and specifically contesting my inheritance of the Cedar Falls property. The allegations were breathtaking in their cruelty and creativity. They claimed that I had used my position as a federal agent to intimidate my father into changing his will, They suggested that I had threatened to investigate his business unless he left me a substantial inheritance. Most damaging of all, they alleged that I had been systematically stealing money from drug seizures throughout my career, and that my father had discovered this, leading to what they characterized as blackmail. Every accusation was designed to destroy not just my inheritance, but my career, my reputation, and my freedom. They weren't just trying to take away property, they were trying to erase me entirely. I read the documents 3 times, sitting in my kitchen with shaking hands, trying to process the depth of betrayal they represented. These weren't the actions of grieving family members making poor decisions. This was a calculated attack, planned and executed with surgical precision. The most painful part wasn't the lies themselves. It was the realization that my own family had been planning this assault, while I sat beside my father's deathbed, while I helped plan his funeral, while I grieved the loss of the only parent who'd ever tried to understand me. They'd been crafting my destruction while I'd been mourning our shared loss. I called Tyler that night, hoping against hope that he might have some explanation, some context that would make sense of what I was reading. His voice was strained when he answered, and I could hear the conflict in every word he spoke. "Katelyn, I tried to talk them out of it," he said quietly. "I told them it was wrong, but Marcus, he's convinced that Dad wasn't thinking clearly toward the end. And Mom, she just goes along with whatever Marcus says these days." "Do you believe them, Tyler?" I asked. "Do you think I'm a corrupt agent? Do you think I blackmailed our father?" The pause before he answered told me everything I needed to know. "I don't know what to believe anymore," he whispered. "Everything's so messed up since Dad died. The business is struggling more than Marcus wants to admit, and there are all these questions about accounts and clients that don't make sense. Maybe they think if they can prove Dad wasn't competent when he changed the will, it'll solve some of their other problems too." That conversation haunted me for weeks, not just because Tyler couldn't bring himself to defend me, but because of what he'd revealed about the state of Reed and Associates. Financial problems, questionable accounts, clients that didn't make sense. As a federal agent, I'd been trained to recognize the signs of money laundering and financial crime. What Tyler was describing sounded like more than just business struggles. It sounded like the kind of problems that arose when a company was being used for purposes beyond its legitimate operations. I started to wonder if my father's gift to me had been more than just a gesture of support. I started to wonder if he'd known something about what was happening to his company, and if he'd been trying to protect me from whatever storm was coming. But before I could pursue those thoughts any further, I had to deal with the immediate crisis. I was facing a legal battle that could destroy everything I'd worked for, and I was facing it alone. My family had declared war on me, and they'd chosen their weapons carefully. They'd attacked my integrity as a federal agent, which meant my superiors would have to investigate their allegations. They'd made the case public, which meant reporters would be sniffing around my cases and my record. They'd timed their attack perfectly, right when I was vulnerable from grief, and distracted by the transition back to active duty. It was a masterpiece of strategic thinking, and I had to admit that Marcus had learned well from our father's business acumen. Unfortunately for him, he'd forgotten one crucial detail about his little sister. I might have been trained by the federal government, but I'd been raised by Robert Reed. And if there was one thing my father had taught all of his children, it was that you never started a fight you weren't prepared to finish. The war was about to begin, and I had no intention of losing. The attack on my reputation began subtly, like poison slowly spreading through water. Within days of the lawsuit becoming public record, I started noticing changes in how people treated me. My colleagues at the DEA Portland field office would stop talking when I entered the break room. My supervisor, Agent Martinez, called me into his office for what he termed a routine discussion about ongoing investigations. The meeting was anything but routine. Martinez was a good man, someone I'd worked with for 3 years and respected deeply. But as he sat across from his desk, reviewing a thick file that hadn't been there the day before, I could see the weight of institutional pressure bearing down on him. "Katelyn, I'm going to be direct with you," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Internal Affairs has been contacted about allegations regarding your conduct. While the investigation is ongoing, I'm required to place you on administrative leave." The words hit me like a physical blow. Administrative leave was career death by 1,000 cuts. It meant I couldn't work cases, couldn't access files, couldn't even enter certain areas of the building without an escort. It meant that every agent in the office would know that I was under suspicion, and in the law enforcement community, suspicion had a way of becoming fact through repetition. "Sir, these allegations are completely fabricated," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. My own family is trying to steal my inheritance, and they're using false accusations about my work to do it. Martinez finally looked up, and I could see the conflict in his expression. I believe you, Reed. Your record speaks for itself, but my hands are tied. The allegations involve mishandling of evidence and theft of seized assets. Internal Affairs has to investigate, and until they do, you're on leave. I wanted to argue. I wanted to present my side of the story, to explain the family dynamics that had led to this moment. But I'd been in law enforcement long enough to know that once the machinery of bureaucracy started turning, individual voices got lost in the grinding of gears. The best thing I could do was stay quiet, let the investigation run its course, and hope that the truth would be enough to save my career. That hope lasted exactly 48 hours. The first news story appeared on a local blog that specialized in government corruption. The headline read, "Federal Agent Under Investigation for Drug Money Theft." The article was careful to use terms like allege and under investigation, but the damage was immediate and devastating. By the end of the day, it had been picked up by 3 major news outlets and shared thousands of times on social media. The story painted me as a rogue agent who had been stealing money from drug seizures for years, using my position to enrich myself while criminals walked free because evidence had been compromised. It cited unnamed sources within the DEA, and included quotes from family members who expressed shock and disappointment at my alleged crimes. I recognized Marcus's fingerprints all over the narrative. The careful timing, the strategic leaks, the way the story was crafted to inflict maximum damage while staying just within the bounds of legal safety. He'd learned well from our father's lessons about managing public perception and controlling information flow. But Marcus had made one crucial error. He'd underestimated how deeply I understood the world he was trying to manipulate. As a DEA agent, I'd learned to trace money, to follow paper trails, and to identify the connections between seemingly unrelated events. While my official duties were suspended, my training wasn't. I started applying those skills to my own situation, and what I discovered made my blood run cold. The law firm representing Marcus and my mother wasn't just any legal practice. Pierce, Sullivan and Associates specialized in complex financial litigation, particularly cases involving federal agencies and regulatory compliance. Their client list read like a who's who of companies that operated in gray areas of federal oversight. More importantly, they'd been doing legal work for Reed and Associates for the past 2 years. That connection led me to start digging deeper into my father's company. Using publicly available records and databases I still had access to through my law enforcement credentials, I began building a picture of Reed and Associates that bore little resemblance to the legitimate consulting firm I thought I knew. The company's client list had changed dramatically in the years since my father's illness. Where it once served established businesses seeking regulatory guidance, it now counted among its clients a disturbing number of shell companies, import-export businesses with questionable ownership structures, and consulting firms that seemed to exist only on paper. The financial records told an even more troubling story. Money flowed through Reed and Associates in patterns that made no sense for a traditional consulting business. Large sums would arrive from one client and be immediately transferred to accounts belonging to other clients, creating a circular flow of funds that served no apparent business purpose. I'd seen these patterns before, in cases involving money laundering operations. Companies would use legitimate businesses as fronts to clean money from illegal activities, moving funds through a series of transactions designed to obscure their original source. It was a sophisticated operation, the kind that required insider knowledge of regulatory systems and banking procedures. The kind of operation that would be perfect for a consulting firm with expertise in federal compliance. As the pieces of the puzzle started coming together, I realized that my father's final gift to me might have been more than just financial security. The property he'd left me wasn't just valuable real estate. According to the deed records, it had been purchased using funds from a Reed and Associates account that had no clear connection to the company's legitimate operations. If my suspicions were correct, my father had discovered what Marcus was doing to his company and had used some of the ill-gotten gains to create a nest egg for me. It would explain why he'd been so secretive about the purchase, why he'd never mentioned it to my mother, and why he'd structured the inheritance in a way that kept the property completely separate from the rest of his estate. It would also explain why Marcus was so desperate to contest the will. If investigators started looking closely at the source of the funds used to purchase my property, they might uncover the entire money laundering operation. The realization that I'd been unknowingly benefiting from criminal activity made me physically sick. But it also gave me something I'd been lacking since this nightmare began: leverage. While I was putting together the pieces of Marcus's operation, he was escalating his attacks on my reputation. The media coverage intensified, with news stories appearing almost daily. Each article contained slightly different details, new allegations, fresh quotes from unnamed sources. The narrative was evolving, growing more damaging with each iteration. The most painful part was watching how the coverage affected my relationships. Friends I'd known for years started treating me differently. Some cut off contact entirely, afraid that association with me might damage their own reputations. Others offered awkward support, the kind that made it clear they had doubts about my innocence. Even Tyler began pulling away. Our weekly phone calls became monthly check-ins, then stopped altogether. When I tried calling him directly, he was always too busy to talk, always on his way to a meeting or dealing with some crisis at work. The message was clear: my youngest brother was choosing self-preservation over family loyalty. The isolation was crushing. I'd spent my entire adult life building an identity around my work, and now that identity was being systematically destroyed. I couldn't go to the office, couldn't work cases, couldn't even mention my job without seeing doubt creep into people's expressions. I was trapped in my Portland apartment, watching my life crumble while my family picked through the wreckage. But isolation also gave me something valuable: time to think, to plan, and to investigate. While Marcus was focused on destroying my reputation, I was quietly building a case against him. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. One of my former confidential informants, a low-level drug dealer named Carlos, who'd helped me crack several major cases, reached out through encrypted channels I'd established during my undercover work. He'd heard about my situation through street networks, and he had information he thought I needed to know. We met at a diner in a part of Portland where federal agents rarely ventured, far from the polished downtown offices where my reputation was being shredded. Carlos was nervous, constantly checking the windows and exits, but his information was solid gold. "Your family's company, Reed and Associates," he said quietly, stirring sugar into coffee he didn't intend to drink. "They've been washing money for the Hernandez organization for at least 2 years. Not the small-time stuff. We're talking major cocaine distribution, millions of dollars moving through their books." The Hernandez organization was one of the most sophisticated drug trafficking networks on the West Coast. We'd been trying to penetrate their money laundering operations for years without success. The idea that my own brother had been facilitating their activities was almost impossible to process. "How do you know this?" I asked, though I was already dreading the answer. Carlos looked uncomfortable. "Because I was one of the guys moving cash to their offices. Small amounts, always different people making the drops, but consistent. Your brother, the tall one with the fancy suits, he always handled the transactions personally. Very careful, very professional. The kind of operation that takes planning and connections." He slid a manila envelope across the table. I kept records. Dates, amounts, descriptions of the people involved. I figured someday this information might be valuable, and it looks like someday is here. The envelope contained a treasure trove of evidence. Photographs of Marcus meeting with known drug dealers. Records of cash transactions that corresponded exactly with deposits into Reed and Associates accounts. Even copies of some of the paperwork used to legitimize the transfers. It was enough to destroy Marcus and everyone connected to his operation. It was also enough to save my career and my reputation. But as I sat in that diner, looking at evidence of my brother's crimes, I felt no satisfaction. Only a deep, aching sadness for what my family had become. Carlos leaned forward, his voice barely audible above the ambient noise of the restaurant. "There's something else you need to know. Word on the street is that your brother's gotten sloppy lately. The heat from your legal situation has him making mistakes, pushing too hard, trying to move too much money too fast. The Hernandez people are getting nervous." "What does that mean?" I asked, though part of me already knew. "It means people who get nervous in this business don't just fire their accountants," Carlos said grimly. "They eliminate problems permanently. If your brother can't clean up his mess soon, he's going to become a liability. And liabilities in the drug trade don't have long lifespans." The meeting ended with Carlos disappearing into the Portland night, leaving me alone with evidence that could save my career and possibly my brother's life. The irony wasn't lost on me. Marcus had spent months trying to destroy me, and now I was the only one who could save him from the consequences of his own actions. But first I had to decide whether he deserved saving. The weight of that decision kept me awake for the next 3 nights. On one hand, Marcus had betrayed everything our family stood for. He'd corrupted our father's legacy, destroyed my career, and put our entire family at risk with his criminal activities. On the other hand, he was still my brother, still the boy who'd taught me to ride a bike and helped me with my math homework. The choice became clearer when I received a phone call that changed everything. It was Tyler, and for the first time in weeks, he sounded genuinely frightened. "Katelyn, I need to see you. Tonight, there are things you need to know about Marcus, about the company, about everything. I can't talk about it over the phone, but I think we're all in danger." We met at a 24-hour coffee shop near Portland State University, far from anywhere we might be recognized. Tyler looked like he hadn't slept in days. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair was unkempt, and his hands shook as he wrapped them around his coffee cup. "I've been trying to stay out of this," he said without preamble. "I thought if I just kept my head down and focused on my own work, everything would blow over. But it's not going to blow over, is it?" I studied my youngest brother's face, seeing echoes of the scared little boy who used to hide in my room during our parents' fights. "Tell me what you know, Tyler." He pulled out his laptop and opened several files. "I've been doing some freelance work for Reed and Associates, helping them upgrade their computer systems. Marcus said it was just family helping family, but what I found in their databases doesn't match what he told me." The files Tyler showed me painted an even more disturbing picture than I'd already assembled. The money laundering operation was larger than I'd suspected, with connections to criminal organizations across the Pacific Northwest. Worse, the digital trail showed that the operation had been escalating rapidly since our father's death, as if Marcus was trying to capitalize on the transition period before anyone noticed the changes. "There's more," Tyler said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I found communications between Marcus and some people I looked up. Drug dealers, money launderers, people with very bad reputations. They're not happy about the attention your lawsuit is bringing to the company. They want the situation resolved quickly and quietly." He showed me printouts of encrypted messages that made my blood run cold. References to cleaning up loose ends and eliminating complications. Discussions about whether the Reed problem could be solved through legal means, or if more direct action would be necessary. "Tyler, you need to get away from this," I said urgently. "Pack a bag tonight and go stay with friends out of state. Don't tell anyone where you're going, and don't contact Marcus or Mom until this is over." "What about you?" he asked. "These people, they're talking about you like you're the biggest threat to their operation. They think you're investigating them because of your DEA connections." I almost laughed at the irony. I wasn't investigating them until they started trying to destroy my life. But now that I know what's really going on, I can't just walk away. Tyler looked at me with something that might have been admiration. "What are you going to do?" I thought about Carlos's information, about Tyler's evidence, about the badge sitting in my apartment that could still open doors and access resources. I thought about my father's legacy being corrupted, about my career being destroyed by lies, and about my brother's criminal associates discussing whether to kill me. "I'm going to do what I was trained to do," I said finally. "I'm going to gather evidence, build a case, and take down a criminal organization. The fact that it's being run by my own brother doesn't change my job." Tyler nodded slowly. "I want to help. I know their computer systems. I have access to files they don't know I can see. If you're going to take them down, you'll need someone on the inside." Looking at my youngest brother, I saw something I hadn't expected: courage. The quiet, bookish kid, who'd always avoided conflict, was finally ready to stand up for what was right, even if it meant standing against his own family. "It's going to be dangerous," I warned him. "If Marcus figures out what we're doing, or if his criminal associates decide we're too much of a threat, we could both end up dead. Then we better make sure we get them before they get us," Tyler said with a determination I'd never heard from him before. As we parted ways that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced since this nightmare began. Not just hope for clearing my name or saving my career, but hope that maybe, just maybe, some part of my family was still worth fighting for. The real war was about to begin, and for the first time, I wouldn't be fighting alone. Working undercover against my own family required a different kind of strength than anything I'd encountered in my DEA career. When you're infiltrating a drug cartel, you know the rules. You know who the enemies are, what they're capable of, and what lines you can't cross. But when the criminals are people who've known you since childhood, people who understand your weaknesses and blind spots better than any training manual could teach them, the game becomes infinitely more complex. Tyler and I developed our own communication system, using encrypted messaging apps and dead drops that would have made my DEA trainers proud. We couldn't risk meeting in person too often, and we certainly couldn't trust phone calls or emails. Marcus had resources now, criminal associates who specialized in surveillance and intimidation. We had to assume that everything we did was being watched. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was using federal law enforcement techniques to investigate federal crimes being committed by the brother who was simultaneously trying to convince the world that I was the corrupt one. Some nights, lying awake in my Portland apartment, I wondered if this was what Alice felt like tumbling down the rabbit hole. Tyler's access to Reed and Associates' computer systems proved invaluable in ways I hadn't anticipated. Not only could he monitor Marcus's communications and financial transactions, but he could also track the digital footprints of the criminal organization my brother had entangled himself with. The Hernandez network was sophisticated, but they'd made the classic mistake of trusting technology they didn't fully understand. Every encrypted message, every financial transfer, every seemingly innocent business communication left traces in the digital infrastructure Tyler had helped design. He'd built backdoors into the system, under the guise of maintenance access, never imagining he'd use them to spy on his own family's criminal enterprise. The picture that emerged from weeks of careful surveillance was more disturbing than either of us had expected. Reed and Associates wasn't just laundering money for the Hernandez organization. They were serving as a hub for multiple criminal networks, providing financial services to drug traffickers, arms dealers, and human trafficking operations throughout the Pacific Northwest. Marcus had transformed our father's respected consulting firm into what federal prosecutors would later describe as a full-service criminal financial institution. The legitimate clients still existed, providing cover and credible revenue streams, but they were vastly outnumbered by customers whose business could never see the light of day. The scale of the operation was staggering. In the 18 months since our father's death, more than $50 million had flowed through accounts controlled by Reed and Associates. The money came from street-level drug sales, protection rackets, illegal weapon sales, and worse. It left the company's accounts as payments to shell companies, real estate investments, and offshore trusts that scattered the funds across multiple jurisdictions. My mother's role in the enterprise was more complex than I'd initially understood. She wasn't just an ignorant bystander being manipulated by Marcus. Patricia Reed had been actively involved in the money laundering operation, using her social connections and charity work to create additional layers of legitimacy for questionable transactions. The revelation hit me like a physical blow when Tyler showed me the evidence. Photographs of my mother at charity galas, smiling beside known criminals who'd purchased tables at fundraising events. Bank records showing that donations to her favorite causes were immediately transferred to accounts controlled by criminal organizations. Even her book club had been infiltrated, with several members serving as low-level money couriers. The woman who'd raised me, who'd taught me about proper behavior and social responsibility, had become a criminal herself. Not through coercion or ignorance, but through deliberate choice. She'd seen the money flowing through her son's business and decided she wanted her share, regardless of where it came from or who got hurt in the process. Understanding my mother's complicity changed how I approached the investigation. This wasn't a case of Marcus going rogue and dragging the family down with him. This was a conspiracy involving multiple family members, planned and executed with careful attention to detail and risk management. The only family member who remained clean was Tyler, and even he was in danger simply by virtue of his technical access to the company's systems. Marcus and my mother couldn't risk him discovering their activities independently, which meant they'd eventually have to bring him into the operation or eliminate him as a potential threat. That realization led to the most difficult conversation of my life. Tyler and I met at a state park outside Portland, walking trails that twisted through old-growth forest where electronic surveillance would be nearly impossible. The early morning mist clung to the trees, creating a dreamlike atmosphere that seemed at odds with the harsh realities we needed to discuss. "They're going to try to recruit you soon," I told him as we paused beside a stream that bubbled over moss-covered rocks. Marcus will probably approach you with some story about expanding your role in the company, giving you more responsibility and better pay. Mom will support him, talking about family loyalty and keeping the business in the family. Tyler picked up a smooth stone and skipped it across a still pool, watching the ripples spread outward. What if I say yes? What if I pretend to go along with whatever they're planning? I'd been dreading this question, but I'd also been expecting it. You can't. You're not trained for deep cover operations, and these people kill anyone who betrays them. One mistake, one moment of hesitation, and you'd be dead before I could help you. So what are my options? He asked, and I could hear the frustration in his voice. Keep pretending I don't know anything while they destroy people's lives. Run away and let them continue using Dad's company for criminal activities, or help you build a case and risk getting killed by drug dealers. There's a fourth option, I said carefully. You could disappear completely. New identity, relocation to another state, federal protection until this is over. I have contacts who could make it happen. Tyler was quiet for a long time, his attention focused on the water flowing around worn stones. Finally he looked up at me with eyes that reminded me of our father in his more thoughtful moments. If I disappear, you'll be fighting this alone. If I stay and pretend to cooperate with them, I might get useful information, but I'll probably get killed. If I help you build a case, we might both get killed, but at least we'll have a chance to stop them. That's about the size of it, I admitted. Then I guess we keep working together, he said with a smile that was equal parts nervous and determined. Because I'd rather die trying to do the right thing than live knowing I let them get away with destroying Dad's legacy. The decision to continue our investigation together led to a dramatic escalation in both the scope of our evidence gathering and the risks we faced. Tyler began documenting everything he could access through the company's computer systems, creating detailed records of financial transactions, communications, and operational procedures. I used my law enforcement background to analyze the evidence and identify patterns that would be compelling to federal prosecutors. What we discovered over the following weeks painted a picture of criminal enterprise that went far beyond simple money laundering. The Hernandez organization and their associates were involved in activities that included drug trafficking, weapons smuggling, human trafficking, and murder for hire. Reed and Associates wasn't just washing their money, it was helping coordinate their operations across multiple states and international borders. The breakthrough that would eventually lead to the dramatic courtroom confrontation came from an unexpected source. Tyler had been monitoring Marcus's email communications when he intercepted a message that made both of us realize how much immediate danger we were in. The message was from someone identified only as H and contained a single line of text: "Reed problem requires permanent solution. Authorize immediate action." Marcus's response was equally chilling. Agreed. Make it look accidental. Timeline flexible, but sooner is better. They weren't just planning to destroy my reputation anymore, they were planning to kill me. The realization that my own brother had authorized my murder crystallized something that had been building inside me for weeks. This wasn't about family loyalty or misguided business decisions anymore. This was about survival, and I was running out of time to act. I spent the next 72 hours in a state of controlled panic, constantly watching for surveillance, varying my routes and schedules, and sleeping with my service weapon within arm's reach. Every unexpected noise made me jump. Every stranger on the street became a potential threat. I'd lived with danger throughout my DEA career, but this was different. This was personal in a way that made it infinitely more terrifying. Tyler was equally paranoid, convinced that every interaction with Marcus or my mother might be his last. He'd started recording conversations with hidden audio devices, documenting threats and incriminating statements that could be used as evidence if something happened to either of us. The stress was taking a toll on both of us. Tyler was losing weight, dark circles shadowing his eyes from sleepless nights spent monitoring computer systems and watching for signs that his cover had been blown. I was drinking too much coffee and not enough water, my nerves stretched to the breaking point by the constant need for vigilance. But we were also making progress. The evidence we'd assembled was comprehensive enough to support federal charges against Marcus, my mother, and several dozen other members of the criminal network. We had financial records, communication intercepts, surveillance photographs, and witness statements that painted a clear picture of conspiracy and racketeering. The challenge was figuring out how to present this evidence without getting ourselves killed in the process. My administrative leave meant I couldn't access DEA resources or initiate official investigations. Tyler's position as a family member made him vulnerable to retaliation if Marcus discovered his activities. We needed a way to get the evidence into the right hands while protecting ourselves from the inevitable backlash. More importantly, we needed to do it before Marcus's criminal associates decided that the Reed problem had waited long enough for a permanent solution. The answer came from studying the legal strategy Marcus and my mother were using in their lawsuit against me. Their attorneys had scheduled the inheritance dispute for a hearing in exactly 3 weeks, timing it to coincide with the internal affairs investigation that could end my career. They were planning a coordinated attack designed to destroy my reputation and credibility simultaneously. But their legal strategy also created an opportunity. The inheritance hearing would be public, with court reporters and official records. If I could introduce evidence of Marcus's criminal activities during the proceedings, it would become part of the legal record and couldn't be suppressed or ignored by corrupt officials. More importantly, the dramatic nature of revealing federal crimes during a family dispute would ensure media coverage that would make it nearly impossible for anyone to quietly eliminate the evidence or the witnesses. Once the information was public, killing Tyler and me would only draw more attention to the criminal enterprise we'd exposed. The plan was risky and required perfect timing, but it offered our best chance of survival while ensuring that justice would be served. We would let Marcus and my mother proceed with their lawsuit, gathering evidence right up until the moment of the hearing. Then when they thought they had me cornered and defenseless, I would reveal everything we'd discovered and watch their world collapse around them. The irony was perfect. Marcus had always been proud of his strategic thinking, his ability to plan complex operations and manipulate outcomes to his advantage. Now his own legal strategy would become the weapon I used to destroy him. Tyler's role in the plan was crucial but dangerous. He would need to maintain his cover for 3 more weeks, continuing to provide technical support to Reed and Associates while secretly documenting every criminal transaction and communication. If Marcus became suspicious during that period, Tyler would be dead before I could help him. But if we could pull it off, we'd have evidence comprehensive enough to dismantle the entire criminal network while protecting ourselves through the publicity and legal protections that came with federal court proceedings. As I outlined the plan to Tyler during another carefully arranged meeting, I could see both excitement and terror in his expression. He understood the risks, but he also understood that this might be our only chance to stop Marcus before more people got hurt. 3 weeks, he said quietly. I can do 3 weeks. You have to be perfect, I warned him. One slip, one moment where Marcus suspects you're working against him, and it's over. Tyler nodded, his jaw set with determination I'd never seen from him before. I've been perfect my whole life at being invisible. I guess it's time to put that skill to good use. As we prepared to part ways, Tyler grabbed my arm with surprising strength. Katelyn, promise me something. If this goes wrong, if they figure out what we're doing before the hearing, don't try to save me. Just take the evidence we have and run. Get it to the FBI or whoever can use it. Tyler, promise me, he insisted. Dad would never forgive me if I let you get killed trying to save my life. And I'd never forgive myself. I looked at my youngest brother, seeing courage and selflessness that reminded me of the best parts of our father's character. I promise, I lied, knowing that there was no force on earth that could stop me from trying to protect him if things went wrong. We hugged briefly, both of us understanding that we might not see each other alive again. Then Tyler disappeared into the Portland night, returning to his double life as a loyal family member who happened to be documenting every detail of his brother's criminal empire. I drove home through empty streets, my mind already focused on the 3 weeks ahead. Everything we'd worked for, everything we'd risked, would come down to a few crucial moments in a courtroom where my family expected to destroy me. They had no idea that I was planning to destroy them first. The 3 weeks leading up to the inheritance hearing passed like a slow-motion nightmare punctuated by moments of absolute terror. Every day brought new evidence of the criminal empire Marcus had built, and every night brought fresh reminders that discovery meant death. Tyler and I had become ghosts in our own lives, communicating through digital shadows and living with the constant awareness that one mistake would cost us everything. The pressure was affecting Tyler in ways that worried me deeply. His usually steady hands developed a tremor that he tried to hide during our brief encounters. Dark circles under his eyes spoke of sleepless nights spent monitoring encrypted communications and documenting financial transactions that could send dozens of people to federal prison. More than once, I caught him staring at nothing, lost in thoughts that seemed to drain the color from his face. During one of our final meetings before the hearing, held in the back corner of a 24-hour laundromat, where the noise of washing machines would mask our conversation, Tyler handed me a flash drive that felt heavier than its physical weight suggested. "Everything's on there," he said, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. "Financial records, communication logs, transaction histories, even some video files from security cameras that Marcus doesn't know I can access. If something happens to me tomorrow, make sure this gets to the right people." I pocketed the drive, feeling the weight of 3 weeks' worth of evidence that could topple a criminal organization spanning multiple states. "Nothing's going to happen to you, Tyler. We're almost done." He gave me a look that was equal parts grateful and skeptical. "Marcus has been asking questions about my work schedule, about why I've been staying late so often. Yesterday Mom cornered me at the house and wanted to know if I'd been talking to you. They're getting suspicious." The news sent ice through my veins. "What did you tell them?" "That I've been working on a freelance project for another client, and that I haven't spoken to you since Dad's funeral. But I don't think they believed me." Tyler's hands shook slightly as he folded his laundry with mechanical precision. "There's something else." I intercepted another message from the Hernandez people. "They're planning something for after the hearing tomorrow. They want to celebrate the resolution of family problems with Marcus and Mom." The euphemism wasn't lost on either of us. In criminal parlance, resolving family problems meant eliminating the family members who posed a threat. They were planning to kill both Tyler and me once the inheritance hearing was over, regardless of the outcome. "Tyler, you need to disappear tonight," I said urgently. "Pack a bag, drive to Seattle and wait for me to contact you. If they're planning to move after the hearing, you can't be anywhere they can find you." "I can't run now," he replied with surprising firmness. "If I disappear the night before the hearing, Marcus will know something's wrong. He'll change his plans, destroy evidence, maybe even call off the court appearance. We'll lose our only chance to expose him publicly." I wanted to argue, to drag him bodily out of that laundromat and force him to prioritize his own safety. But I knew he was right. Our entire strategy depended on Marcus feeling confident and secure when he walked into that courtroom. If he suspected that Tyler had been working against him, he'd never proceed with the hearing that would become his downfall. "Then we stick to the plan," I said, though every instinct I'd developed as a federal agent was screaming warnings. "But Tyler, I need you to promise me something. The moment that hearing is over, the second we walk out of that courtroom, you disappear. Don't go home, don't stop to pack, don't even say goodbye. Just run." Tyler nodded, but I could see the fear in his eyes. He was 28 years old, a computer programmer who'd never fired a gun or thrown a punch in anger, and he was about to go head-to-head with people who killed for a living. The courage he was showing humbled me in ways I couldn't adequately express. We parted ways one final time, both of us understanding that the next time we saw each other would be in a courtroom where everything we'd worked for would either triumph or fail spectacularly. The night before the hearing, I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat in my apartment reviewing every piece of evidence we'd collected, every detail of the plan we'd crafted, every possible scenario for how the next day might unfold. The black case containing my DEA badge sat on the coffee table in front of me, a tangible reminder of the authority I'd need to invoke when the moment came. The badge represented more than just my professional credentials. It was proof of everything Marcus and my mother had tried to destroy through their false accusations. More importantly, it was the key that would unlock federal resources and protection once I revealed the evidence of their criminal enterprise. I'd already made preliminary contact with FBI agents who specialized in financial crimes, using secure channels that couldn't be traced back to me. They were prepared to act the moment I provided them with evidence of the money laundering operation, but they needed that evidence to be presented in a way that would hold up in federal court. The inheritance hearing would provide exactly that opportunity. As dawn broke over Portland, I dressed carefully in a conservative dark suit that projected competence and authority. I wanted to look like a federal agent, not a desperate woman fighting for her inheritance. Every detail mattered in the psychological warfare that was about to unfold. The drive to the Multnomah County Courthouse took me through neighborhoods where I'd once felt safe and comfortable. Now every intersection seemed like a potential ambush point. Every parked car might contain surveillance operatives or worse. I'd lived with paranoia for 3 weeks, but today it felt justified and necessary. The courthouse parking lot was already busy when I arrived, filled with attorneys, clients, and court personnel going about their normal business. I spotted Marcus's BMW in a prime parking space near the main entrance, its gleaming surface reflecting the morning sun like armor. My mother's Mercedes was parked beside it, the two vehicles positioned like a statement of wealth and power. Tyler's beat-up Honda was nowhere to be seen, which meant he'd either arrived early and parked elsewhere, or was running late due to nerves or traffic. I felt a moment of panic at the thought that something might have happened to him during the night, that Marcus and his criminal associates might have decided to eliminate potential threats before the hearing began. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Running 5 minutes late. Everything's fine. See you inside. The coded language we'd established told me that Tyler was safe and still committed to our plan, but I wouldn't feel completely relieved until I saw him walk through the courthouse doors. The hallway outside the courtroom was exactly as I'd expected, a stage set for a performance of family dysfunction. Marcus stood near the windows, speaking quietly with his attorney Jonathan Pierce, their body language radiating confidence and control. My mother sat on a nearby bench, dressed in expensive black clothing that suggested mourning and respectability in equal measure. Tyler appeared at exactly 9:55, walking through the main entrance with casual precision that suggested he'd timed his arrival to minimize conversation with Marcus and our mother. He nodded politely to both of them, offered a brief greeting about being glad this whole situation would finally be resolved, and took a seat in the gallery section where family members and observers waited for proceedings to begin. The performance was flawless. To anyone watching, Tyler appeared to be exactly what Marcus expected, a neutral family member who wanted the inheritance dispute settled so everyone could move on with their lives. There was no indication that he'd spent the past 3 weeks documenting evidence of massive criminal activity. My attorney, Victoria Barnes, met me near the courtroom entrance with a professional greeting that masked her knowledge of what was really about to happen. Victoria was one of the few people I'd trusted with the truth about our investigation, and she'd agreed to help coordinate the revelation of evidence during the hearing. Her expertise in federal criminal law would be crucial in ensuring that everything we discovered was presented in a way that would trigger immediate law enforcement action. "Are you ready for this?" she asked quietly as we reviewed our notes one final time. "I've been ready for 3 weeks," I replied, though my heart was racing with adrenaline and anticipation. Judge Harrison called the session to order at exactly 10 o'clock, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd presided over thousands of family disputes but probably none quite like this one. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with dark wood paneling and fluorescent lighting that gave everything a slightly surreal quality. Marcus's attorney opened with a presentation that was polished, professional, and utterly damning in its false accusations. He painted me as a rogue federal agent who had used my position to intimidate my dying father into changing his will. He suggested that my inheritance of the Cedar Falls property was the result of blackmail and corruption, and he requested that the court set aside the bequest and redistribute the assets according to what he termed my father's true intentions. The performance was masterful, combining just enough truth to be believable with carefully crafted lies designed to destroy my credibility. Pierce presented documents that appeared to support his claims, including medical records suggesting my father had been mentally compromised during his final months and financial statements that supposedly showed suspicious activities in my personal accounts. I listened to the litany of false accusations without visible reaction, though inside I was cataloging every lie for the destruction I was about to unleash. Marcus sat behind his attorney with an expression of regretful determination, playing the role of a concerned brother forced to take unpleasant action for the good of the family. My mother testified next, delivering a performance that would have been worthy of an Academy Award. She spoke softly about her concerns regarding my mental state, my alleged drug use, and my supposed history of violent behavior. She claimed that my father had confided his fears about my influence over family financial decisions, and she suggested that my inheritance was the result of manipulation rather than genuine paternal affection. Every word was calculated to maximize damage while minimizing legal risk. She never made direct accusations that could be proven false in court, but instead relied on implications and suggestions that would plant seeds of doubt in the judge's mind. It was a sophisticated character assassination, and under normal circumstances it might have been effective. But these weren't normal circumstances, and I wasn't going to respond to their attack with traditional legal arguments. When Victoria called me to testify on my own behalf, I walked to the witness stand with steady steps and clear purpose. I raised my right hand and swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, knowing that I was about to do exactly that in ways that would shatter every expectation in that courtroom. "Miss Reed," Victoria began, "you've heard serious allegations about your conduct as a federal agent and your relationship with your father. How do you respond to these claims?" I looked directly at Judge Harrison, then shifted my gaze to include Marcus and my mother in my line of sight. "Your Honor, everything they've said about me is a lie. But more importantly, the real reason they're trying to destroy my reputation has nothing to do with my inheritance and everything to do with covering up their own criminal activities. The courtroom went dead silent. Pierce started to object, but Judge Harrison silenced him with a gesture, his attention clearly captured by the unexpected direction of my testimony. I'd like to present evidence that Marcus Reed and Patricia Reed have been using Reed and Associates to launder money for drug trafficking organizations, weapons dealers, and other criminal enterprises. This inheritance dispute is actually an attempt to silence a federal agent who discovered their activities. The explosion of voices that followed was immediate and chaotic. Pierce was on his feet demanding sanctions for unfounded accusations. Marcus was conferring urgently with my mother, both of their faces showing the first cracks in their carefully constructed facades. Tyler sat motionless in the gallery, his expression neutral but his hands gripping the edge of the bench. Judge Harrison restored order with sharp commands and the threat of contempt charges, but I could see the wheels turning in his mind. He was experienced enough to recognize when testimony had moved beyond routine family squabbling into something far more serious. "Miss Reed," he said carefully, "these are extremely serious allegations. Do you have evidence to support these claims?" I reached into my briefcase and withdrew the black case containing my DEA badge, placing it carefully on the witness stand where everyone could see it. "Your Honor, I'd like to invoke my authority as a federal law enforcement officer to present evidence of ongoing criminal activity to this court." The badge gleamed under the courtroom lights, its gold shield catching reflections that seemed to illuminate the entire room. In that moment, I wasn't just Katelyn Reed, the disinherited daughter fighting for her father's property. I was Special Agent Reed, armed with federal authority and evidence of crimes that demanded immediate action. I have documentation of financial transactions, communication records, and witness statements that prove Marcus Reed and Patricia Reed have been operating a money laundering enterprise through Reed and Associates. They've processed more than $50 million in criminal proceeds over the past 18 months, providing services to drug trafficking organizations and other criminal networks. As I spoke, I could see the color draining from Marcus's face. My mother had gone completely still, her earlier performance of wounded motherhood replaced by something that looked very much like terror. Judge Harrison leaned forward, his expression grave. "Miss Reed, if you're alleging federal crimes, this court may not be the appropriate venue for this evidence." "You're absolutely right, Your Honor," I replied. "Which is why I've already contacted the Federal Bureau of Investigation about this matter. In fact, I believe they're waiting outside to take custody of the evidence and begin formal proceedings." That's when everything exploded. Marcus shot to his feet, his composed facade finally cracking completely. "This is insane. She's making this up to avoid losing the inheritance case." Pierce was shouting objections and demanding sanctions, his voice rising above the general chaos that had erupted throughout the courtroom. My mother sat frozen, her face a mask of panic as she realized that her carefully planned legal strategy had just become a federal criminal investigation. But it was Judge Harrison's next words that turned my tactical victory into something approaching triumph. "Bailiff," he said in a voice that cut through the noise like a blade, "please check if there are federal agents waiting outside this courtroom." The bailiff returned within minutes, accompanied by 3 FBI agents whose presence transformed the atmosphere from chaotic to deadly serious. Lead Agent Rodriguez stepped forward, his credentials already in hand. "Your Honor, we're here regarding allegations of money laundering and racketeering activities. We have warrants for the arrest of Marcus Reed and Patricia Reed, and we'd like to take immediate custody of any evidence related to these crimes." The courtroom had gone silent again, but this time the silence felt electric with tension and anticipation. Marcus and my mother were no longer family members involved in an inheritance dispute. They were suspects in a federal criminal investigation, and everyone in that room could see their world collapsing in real time. As the FBI agents moved to take Marcus and my mother into custody, I caught Tyler's eye across the courtroom. He gave me the smallest of nods, a gesture that conveyed relief, gratitude, and a promise that he would disappear the moment he left the courthouse. The badge that had started this whole confrontation was still sitting on the witness stand, its presence serving as a reminder that sometimes justice comes not from family loyalty or legal maneuvering, but from the simple act of a federal agent doing her job. Even when that job means destroying the people you once called family. The moment Agent Rodriguez placed handcuffs on Marcus, something inside me shifted permanently. I watched my older brother's face cycle through disbelief, rage, and finally a kind of hollow resignation as the reality of his situation became undeniable. The golden child who had always gotten everything he wanted was being led away in federal custody, his expensive suit wrinkled and his carefully styled hair disheveled from the struggle. My mother's arrest was quieter but somehow more devastating to witness. Patricia Reed had spent her entire adult life cultivating an image of respectability and social prominence. Now she was being read her Miranda rights in front of a courtroom full of witnesses, her reputation destroyed as thoroughly as if it had been dynamited. The woman who had once worried about what people would think of my career choice was about to become the subject of headlines she could never have imagined. Judge Harrison suspended the inheritance hearing indefinitely, pending the outcome of the federal investigation. The property dispute that had started this entire chain of events suddenly seemed trivial compared to the criminal charges that Marcus and my mother would soon be facing. Money laundering, racketeering, conspiracy, and accessory to drug trafficking carried sentences measured in decades rather than years. As the courtroom cleared, Tyler approached me with careful steps, his face showing the strain of the past 3 weeks but also a kind of peace I hadn't seen from him since our father's death. We didn't speak immediately, both of us understanding that the courthouse probably contained surveillance equipment that could be monitoring our conversation. Instead, Tyler handed me a small piece of paper with an address written in his careful handwriting. "I'll be staying here for a few days," he said quietly. "After that, I'm thinking about taking a long vacation somewhere with good beaches and no extradition treaties." I nodded, understanding that he was telling me he'd be available for federal prosecutors who might need his testimony, but that he'd be disappearing completely once his legal obligations were fulfilled. It was the smart play, the safe choice for someone who'd just helped bring down a criminal organization with international connections. Agent Rodriguez intercepted me as I was leaving the courthouse, his expression professional but not unfriendly. "Reed, we're going to need you to come with us for a debriefing. There are a lot of details to sort through, and your cooperation will be essential for building the strongest possible case." The FBI field office in Portland was exactly what I'd expected: utilitarian furniture, fluorescent lighting, and the kind of institutional coffee that could strip paint. But after 3 weeks of looking over my shoulder and sleeping with one eye open, the sterile environment felt like sanctuary. These were people who understood the work I'd been doing, the risks I'd taken, and the importance of the evidence Tyler and I had gathered. The debriefing lasted 14 hours, broken up by meals that tasted like cardboard and coffee breaks that helped keep my mind sharp as federal agents dissected every detail of Marcus's criminal enterprise. Agent Rodriguez led the questioning, but the room also contained prosecutors from the U.S. Attorney's Office, financial crimes specialists, and liaison officers from multiple agencies that would be involved in unraveling the money laundering network. The scope of the investigation that followed was staggering. Within 48 hours of Marcus and my mother's arrest, federal agents had executed search warrants at Reed and Associates offices in 3 states, freezing bank accounts in 7 countries, and detained more than 30 individuals connected to the criminal network. The Hernandez organization, which had seemed untouchable for years, began falling apart as key financial infrastructure collapsed. Tyler's digital evidence proved invaluable in ways that impressed even veteran financial crimes investigators. His documentation of electronic transactions, communication patterns, and operational procedures provided prosecutors with a roadmap to criminal activities spanning multiple jurisdictions and involving dozens of separate criminal enterprises. More importantly, the evidence he'd gathered included recordings of conversations between Marcus and known drug dealers that would make conviction on the most serious charges virtually certain. Federal prosecutors were already discussing plea bargain possibilities that would require full cooperation in exchange for sentences that might allow Marcus and my mother to eventually see freedom again. The media coverage of the arrests was everything I'd hoped for and feared in equal measure. Local news outlets picked up the story immediately, but it quickly gained national attention as the scope of the criminal enterprise became clear. Headlines ranged from DEA agent exposes family's criminal empire to Oregon consulting firm laundered millions for drug cartels. The coverage was largely sympathetic to my situation, portraying me as a dedicated federal agent who discovered criminal activity within her own family and chosen duty over blood. But it also meant that my face was on television screens across the country, my personal story becoming public entertainment for people who would never understand the cost of the choices I'd made. The internal affairs investigation that had put my career in jeopardy was quietly closed within a week of Marcus's arrest. My supervisors, who had been forced to treat me as a potential criminal, suddenly remembered that my record spoke for itself and that the allegations against me had always seemed suspicious. I was reinstated to active duty with full honors, and an apology that felt sincere even if it came too late to undo months of professional isolation. But returning to work wasn't as simple as putting on my badge and walking back into the Portland field office. The case had changed me in ways that were still revealing themselves weeks after the arrests. I'd always known that law enforcement meant making hard choices, but I'd never imagined I'd have to choose between my family and my oath to protect and serve. The psychological evaluation that accompanied my reinstatement was conducted by Dr. Sarah Chen, a psychologist who specialized in treating federal agents who'd experienced traumatic situations during the course of their duties. She had kind eyes and a gentle manner that made it easy to talk about things I'd been keeping buried since the day I first read Marcus's lawsuit. "You're experiencing a form of grief," she explained during one of our sessions. "You didn't just lose family members to arrest and imprisonment. You lost the illusion that family bonds were stronger than criminal temptation. That's a profound loss, and it's natural to feel conflicted about your role in exposing their activities." Dr. Chen was right about the grief, but she couldn't fully understand the complexity of what I was feeling. There was grief for the family I'd thought I had, but there was also relief that the truth was finally out in the open. There was guilt about the destruction I'd caused, but there was also pride in having done the right thing when it mattered most. Most complicated of all was the question of forgiveness. Could I forgive Marcus and my mother for trying to destroy my life to protect their criminal activities? Could I forgive myself for the years I'd spent away from home, leaving my father's legacy vulnerable to corruption? Could I forgive Tyler for staying silent so long, even though his eventual courage had made justice possible? The answers to those questions came slowly, emerging through months of therapy sessions. Long conversations with Tyler during his brief visits to Portland, and quiet evenings spent walking along the Columbia River, thinking about the choices that had brought me to this point. Tyler proved to be more resilient than any of us had expected. After fulfilling his obligations to federal prosecutors, he'd indeed taken that vacation to a place with good beaches and unreliable internet connections. But instead of hiding indefinitely, he'd used the time to process what had happened and to decide what kind of life he wanted to build going forward. When he returned to Portland 6 months later, he was tanned, rested, and carrying plans for a new software company that would specialize in financial security systems. "If I'm going to work with computer networks and money transfers," he explained over dinner at a quiet restaurant overlooking the Willamette River, "I might as well make sure I'm helping the good guys this time." He'd also made peace with the choices we'd both made during those difficult weeks. "I spent my whole life trying to avoid conflict," he told me as we shared dessert and watched boats navigate the river current. "But some conflicts are worth having, some fights are necessary. I'm glad we fought this one together." The trial of Marcus and my mother took place 18 months after their arrest, in a federal courthouse that was packed with reporters, law enforcement officials, and family members of victims whose lives had been destroyed by the drugs that Marcus's money laundering operation had helped distribute. The proceedings lasted 6 weeks and resulted in convictions on all major charges. Marcus received a sentence of 25 years in federal prison, with the possibility of parole after serving 16 years if he continued to cooperate with ongoing investigations. My mother was sentenced to 12 years, a lighter punishment that reflected her secondary role in the criminal enterprise and her willingness to provide testimony against other defendants. I attended the sentencing hearing, sitting in the gallery section where I could observe without being drawn into the media circus that surrounded the case. Marcus looked older, his face carrying lines that hadn't been there before his arrest. When given the opportunity to address the court before sentencing, he offered apologies that sounded rehearsed and hollow. My mother's statement was more difficult to hear. She spoke about shame, about regret, about the choices that had led her family to destruction. For a few moments she sounded like the woman who had raised me, who had taught me about right and wrong, even if she'd forgotten those lessons herself. But then she mentioned the pain of being betrayed by her own daughter, and I realized that even facing federal prison, she still saw herself as the victim in this story. I didn't speak to either of them during the trial or sentencing. There would be time for those conversations later, if we all chose to have them. For now it was enough to know that justice had been served, and that the criminal organization they'd built was permanently dismantled. The property my father had left me became the foundation for a new chapter in my life. I sold the land to a conservation trust that would preserve it as habitat for wildlife, using the proceeds to establish a scholarship fund for children of law enforcement officers who were killed or disabled in the line of duty. It seemed like the kind of legacy my father would have approved of, a way to honor both his memory and the principles that had guided my career. Tyler used his share of the family business liquidation to fund his new company, which quickly gained contracts with federal agencies looking to improve their financial security systems. He also established a foundation that provided technology training for at-risk youth, giving kids from troubled backgrounds the kinds of opportunities that might help them avoid the criminal paths that had destroyed so many lives. The house by Mirror Lake was sold to a family with young children, who would fill it with laughter and love instead of secrets and criminal conspiracies. I kept a few photographs and some of my father's books, but most of the contents were donated to charity or distributed among distant relatives who hadn't been involved in Marcus's activities. My career with the DEA continued, but in a different capacity. I was promoted to a supervisory position that focused on financial crimes and money laundering investigations, using the experience I'd gained from my family's case to help other agents recognize and pursue similar criminal enterprises. The work was challenging and rewarding in ways that made the personal costs seem worthwhile. I also began speaking at law enforcement conferences about the psychological challenges of investigating crimes involving family members or close associates. The lessons I'd learned about maintaining objectivity and professional ethics in emotionally charged situations proved valuable to other agents facing similar dilemmas. 5 years after Marcus's conviction, I received a letter from him in federal prison. It was 3 pages of careful handwriting that appeared to represent genuine reflection rather than manipulation or self-pity. He wrote about the therapy he'd been receiving, the education programs he'd completed, and the gradual process of accepting responsibility for choices that had destroyed our family. The letter also contained an apology that felt different from his courtroom statement. It acknowledged specific harm he'd caused, recognized the impossible position he'd put me in, and expressed understanding of why I'd made the choices I'd made. It didn't ask for forgiveness or reconciliation, but it opened the door for communication if I chose to walk through it. I wrote back a brief note that acknowledged his letter and wished him well in his rehabilitation efforts. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt exactly as they were before. But sometimes you can construct something new in their place, something stronger because it's built on truth rather than convenience. My mother's release from federal prison after serving 8 years was covered by local media, but generated much less attention than her original arrest. I wasn't there when she walked out of the Federal Correctional Institution in Dublin, California, but Tyler was. He'd maintained sporadic contact with her throughout her incarceration, visiting when his schedule allowed and accepting collect phone calls that helped her maintain connection to the family she'd lost through her choices. She moved to a halfway house in Sacramento, taking a job at a nonprofit organization that helped formerly incarcerated women transition back into society. The work was difficult and poorly paid, a far cry from the social prominence she'd once enjoyed, but it seemed to provide purpose and structure that she needed to rebuild her life. When she was finally released to independent living, she called to ask if we could meet for coffee. I agreed, choosing a neutral location in downtown Portland, where we could talk without the weight of family history pressing down on every word. The woman who sat across from me bore little resemblance to the polished society matron who had helped plan my destruction. Prison had aged her, adding gray to her hair and lines to her face that spoke of hard-won wisdom rather than simple aging. Her clothes were simple and practical, her manner subdued but not broken. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said after we'd exchanged awkward pleasantries and ordered coffee neither of us really wanted. "I know what I did was unforgivable, but I wanted you to know that I understand now why you made the choices you made. You were the only one of us who remembered what Dad taught us about doing the right thing." We talked for 2 hours, covering territory that ranged from practical matters like family finances to deeper questions about guilt, responsibility, and the possibility of redemption. It wasn't a reconciliation in any traditional sense, but it was a conversation between 2 adults who had learned difficult lessons about the cost of moral choices. As I drove home that evening, I thought about the journey that had brought me to that coffee shop, sitting across from a woman who had once been my enemy and was slowly becoming something more complex. The family I'd grown up in was gone forever, destroyed by greed and criminal ambition. But the family Tyler and I were building together, based on honesty and mutual respect rather than obligation and convenience, felt stronger and more authentic than anything we'd lost. The badge that had triggered the FBI's storming of that courtroom still sits in my desk drawer, along with commendations and certificates that mark the milestones of a career dedicated to justice. But it's no longer the most important thing in my life. That honor belongs to the relationships I've rebuilt on foundations of truth, the work I do to prevent other families from facing the choices mine confronted, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that when I was tested by the ultimate conflict between loyalty and duty, I chose correctly. Some battles are won through violence, others through legal maneuvering or political pressure, but the most important victories happen when ordinary people choose to do extraordinary things, because those things are right, regardless of the personal cost. That's the lesson my father tried to teach me in his quiet way, and it's the lesson I hope to pass on to others who face impossible choices in their own lives. The story that began with betrayal and false accusations in a sterile courtroom has become something larger and more hopeful. It's become a reminder that justice is possible, that truth has power, and that sometimes the hardest fights are the ones most worth winning. And sometimes when you're strong enough to stand alone for what's right, you discover that you're not alone after all. You're part of something bigger than family obligations or personal comfort. You're part of the long, difficult work of making the world a little more just, one difficult choice at a time. That's enough. That's more than enough. That's everything. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.